that brought about freedom of India after the long eras of oppression of the British rule. This put an end to the prolonged suffering and unspeakable agony. But does these carry forward only 3 days, or does it welcome a disguised form of trauma in the name of partition? Partition, with its inhuman strength, created two independent nations called India and Pakistan on the basis of religious discrimination. The hope of freedom trembles when the sudden decision of destruction, that is partition, makes people suffer in a new, unexpected form. Tragedy enters into the life of people when they are forced to move from one place to the unknown, from the fearful days of British rule to the atmosphere of loot, rape and murder in the hand of the same people who were the part of their own nation a few days ago. A hunger for bloodshed and barbarity reaches its epitome. I would like to quote here a scene from Bapsi Sidhu's Ice Candy Man. The man is knocked down, his leaves are drawn away from rotting, palm stained teeth in a stream. Women become the ultimate target for revenge and the most victims of all. I quote from Train to Pakistan by Kuswan Singh that gentle women of having their veils taken off march down crowded streets to be raped in the marketplace. These physical and the emotional tortures gradually takes the form of trauma. But the journey of trauma doesn't end here. It takes the form of intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma is a kind of trauma that is transmitted from one generation to the next. It is a kind of outburst of the quote-unquote secrets of the first generation that is transmitted to the next generation through quote-unquote unconscious processes. I would like to quote here Aditi Chakraborty, who writes, I quote, "For diasporic communities, the trauma of forced migration, cultural rupture, and marginalization often become embedded in their collective consciousness, shaping their perception of the self and the world," unquote. So the partition, the trauma of partition does not only limit itself only within the first generation of victim. It is transmitted to the next generation and makes them the equal sufferer. I would like to give here some real instances. First of all, there is Yadif Kaur and her grandfather. I didn't find the actual picture, so I have put the animated version. So Yadif Kaur belongs to the third generation, but the trauma of the partition stays within her through the struggles of her grandfather. She mentions that both the mother and the sister of her grandfather committed suicide to save themselves from the attackers. And even the father of her grandfather also was killed during this process. So this created a kind of trauma within him. But as a result of the intergenerational trauma, this is transmitted to Kaur and her sisters. She mentions, I quote, "My 3 sisters and I grew up struggling to express difficult emotions such as anger or fear in a healthy and regulated manner," unquote. Then there is Devika Aurora and her grandfather. Her grandfather belongs to the her grandfather is a second generation survivor of partition. But the trauma of the symptoms of trauma can be found within him also through her excessive stubbornness, excessive wish to control power, or excessive wish to have all the monies. So these are some examples of the people who are still suffering the intergenerational trauma of partition. Now I would like to talk about a novel written by Rima Modgil, that is Perfect 8. Here the narrator, Ira, talks about her mother, who is unnamed and referred as Ma. Ma witnessed the trauma of partition at the age of 5 through the emerging consciousness of discrimination. And he witnessed the death of her parents, the violence of communal riots. So these situations planted the seed of trauma within her. She gradually started to see dreams about her parents and continuously tried to commit suicide. This arrival of traumatized experiences through flashbacks, as Kathy Carruth mentions, I quote, "are threatening to the chemical structure of the brain and can ultimately lead to deterioration," unquote. Through biological and environmental processes, these trauma is transmitted to Ira also. She used to suffer from nightmares, and in her childhood, she used to comment or make announcements of the people who are going to die. She also always searched for the sorrowful things. She mentions, I quote, "Happiness was something we would always leave behind and go somewhere else," unquote. So at the end also, we find that just like her mother, she also tries to commit suicide. The next work that I would like to talk about is a collection of stories that is the Unsafe Asylum, written by the Henriette Kala. Here, I would like to talk about the sixth story, that is named as folie à deux. It is a French term that means madness of two. It means that the psychosis of association or the shared paranoid disorder. It is a kind of syndrome or psychological disorder when the paranoid delusions are transmitted from one person to another who are closely related to each other. And it is a rare kind of intergenerational trauma. So here in this story, we find that the communal riots, the constant threats of being attacked, infused trauma within an unknown woman. And then she started to suffer from panic attacks and the auditory hallucinations that the people from the mob are going to kill her, quote unquote, carve her to pieces, amputate her breast. And then she started to get well by the treatment of Dr. Kohli, but the death of her husband infused the trauma once more. At the end, just like the mother of Ira, she also committed suicide. But the journey of trauma doesn't end here. As a result or as an impact of the intergenerational trauma, this agony of the mother is transmitted to her children. Her son Om, her younger daughter Chitra, and her elder daughter also suffer from the panic attacks, delusions, and act of suspecting others. Even the elder daughter suspected that the Dr. Kohli is a physical abuser. How the impact of the intergenerational trauma can bring a helplessness within people can be found within the statement of Dr. Kohli, who says, I quote, "The last time I had cried was when my father had gone out and got himself killed by a stray bullet. It was a similar blazing afternoon." Ma'am, at 2 minutes. Now, I would like to talk about the healing approaches. So, physical agony is easier to cure, but not the mental agony. So, there is a novel by Dr. Mariel Bew that is Break the Cycle, a guide to healing intergenerational trauma. Here she asks the readers as a cycle breaker and says that it will take some time to break the cycle, but we can at the end find the inner peace. So, first of all, the tool she mentioned is sound bath. Then she talks about the intergenerational higher self. That it focuses on the fact that the happy memories that we have shared with our parents, that will be our the curable sources that will help us to achieve this higher self, and that is how we will be able to heal the trauma. Then the last technique that she focuses on is the still technique. So it says that instead of responding in a triggered emotion, achieve this self. To conclude, I would like to quote by 14th Dalai Lama that peace can only last where human rights are respected. Thank you.
খুব ভালো হয়েছে, তোমাকেও এই একটাই কথা বলা।